For folks watching, it might be hard to understand the world I came from. It wasn't just a big family, it was a universe with its own gravity, its own rules, and the central, unshakable rule for a young Duggar girl was this: your ultimate purpose, your highest calling, was to become a godly wife and mother. That was the finish line. That was the whole point of the race. And as a little girl, you don't question gravity. You just learn to walk within it. I saw my older cousins, the ones in the spotlight. They were the blueprint. They were sweet. They were modest. They baked casseroles, and they waited. They waited for a courtship that was as carefully choreographed as a ballet. Every conversation supervised, every touch forbidden until a ring was on a finger. That was the path. That was the only path to a happy, blessed life. And I tried. Believe me, I tried to fit into that mold. I wanted to be a good Duggar girl. But there was always this other sound, a different kind of music playing in my head. Can any of you remember a time like that? When you felt a pull towards something that everyone else seemed to think was, well, frivolous or even wrong? For me, that music was, well, music and art, and the sheer electric thrill of creating something that was just mine, not for the family, not for the show, not to fulfill a role, but for the simple, rebellious joy of it. I remember one afternoon, I must have been 14. I was supposed to be helping with the little ones, but I'd slipped away to a corner of the property with a cheap, old guitar someone had given me. I wasn't any good, mind you. My fingers were sore and the chords were all wrong, but I was writing a song. Just a few silly, heartfelt lines about how I felt looking at the sky. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was mine. And in that moment, strumming those clumsy chords, I felt a connection to God that was more real, more personal than any I'd felt just reciting the scriptures I was taught. It was like he wasn't just a rule maker in the sky, but a collaborator, right there in the muddle of my creation. It was a whisper, a tiny, fragile thread of a thought. What if my purpose isn't just to be a reflection of a future husband? What if I have a song to sing that is mine alone? That thought was terrifying, because in my world, thinking for yourself wasn't just discouraged, it was seen as a dangerous path to pride, to sin. So I tucked that thread away. I buried the song lyrics in a notebook. I smiled for the cameras. I talked about courtship and waiting and being a keeper of the home. But that thread, it never quite went away. It was like a single, stubborn strand of a different color in a vast beige tapestry. And that's the thing about those little threads of self. You can try to hide them. You can try to conform, but they have a way of working their way back to the surface. For me, the pull became undeniable when I faced my first real public courtship. It was everything I was supposed to want. He was a fine, upstanding young man from a good family. We followed all the rules. Our chaperoned outings were like something out of a very strict, very G-rated movie. But my heart wasn't in it. It felt like I was playing a part, reading from a script written for someone else. I'd look at him, and then I'd think about that old guitar, about the thrill of a blank canvas, about the dream of walking into a room and not being introduced as so-and-so's cousin, but just as Amy. The pressure to say yes, to step onto that preordained path was immense. It was the path to approval, to acceptance, to fulfilling my purpose. To say no felt like I was failing at the one thing I was born to do. The guilt was a physical weight on my chest. I remember kneeling by my bed one night, praying for clarity, for God to just make me want the life I was supposed to want. But the answer that came back wasn't a change of heart. It was that same stubborn thread, that whisper, "Your song is still waiting." So I did the hardest thing I had ever done up to that point. I ended the courtship. And in my world, that was like announcing you were quitting the winning team right before the championship. The disappointment was a quiet, chilling thing. The questions, the worried looks. What's wrong with Amy? Is she not content with God's plan? For a while, I wondered the same thing myself. I felt adrift. I had untethered myself from the main anchor of my identity, and I was floating in a sea of uncertainty. Who was I if I wasn't walking the path of a Duggar woman? But a funny thing happens when you're untethered. You're forced to learn how to swim, and then you start to notice the currents you never knew were there. That's when I started painting more. I started writing my own music, not just for myself, but to share. I got a job. I made friends outside the circle I was born into. I started to build an identity, piece by piece, not based on who I was supposed to marry, but on what made my soul feel alive. It was messy. It was scary. There were missteps and heartaches they never showed on TV. But with every small choice, that single, fragile thread I'd been clinging to began to weave itself into something stronger. It was becoming a rope I could use to pull myself toward a future I was designing myself. And that, I've learned, is the truth they don't tell you when you're a young girl in a world of rules. Your purpose isn't something you find by fitting perfectly into a pre-cut mold. It's something you create with every brave, imperfect, messy choice you make. It's in the music you write, even if your fingers are sore. It's in the dreams you dare to dream, even if they don't look like anyone else's. But just when I thought I was finally finding my footing, building a life on my own terms, the unthinkable happened. A scandal erupted that shattered our family's public image and sent my own private world into a tailspin. The very foundations of everything I'd ever known were rocked to the core. And in the midst of that terrifying chaos, I was faced with a choice that would define me forever: to stay silent in the name of family loyalty, or to finally, fully find my own voice.